On this day of discovery, author and Cornerstone University President Joe Stoll travels to modern Turkey to the excavations of two ancient cities, Thyatira and Philadelphia. These first-century communities were home for 2 of 7 churches specifically addressed in the beginning of the book of Revelation, a revelation from the resurrected Jesus received in a vision by the Apostle John. At the end of the 1st century, Christianity is facing mounting opposition in the empire. John is a prisoner on the island of Patmos for his faith in one God, which goes against a Roman Empire that embraces many gods, chief among them the Caesar of Rome. It is on Patmos that Jesus appears to John to send a message to the world, a message that is today what we know as the book of Revelation. But to the 1st century church, letters of challenge and hope. Journey to the 7 churches of Revelation, the letters to Thyatira and Philadelphia on this day of discovery.
What you see, write in a book and send it to the 7 churches which are in Asia, to Ephesus, to Smyrna, to Pergamos, to Thyatira, to Sardis, to Philadelphia, and to Laodicea. And to the angel of the church in Thyatira write, These things says the Son of God, who has eyes like a flame of fire, and his feet like fine brass. I know your works, love, service, faith, and your patience. And as for your works, the last are more than the first. Nevertheless, I have a few things against you, because you allow that woman Jezebel, who calls herself a prophetess, to teach and seduce my servants to commit sexual immorality and to eat things sacrificed to idols. And I gave her time to repent of her sexual immorality, and she did not repent. Indeed, I will cast her into a sickbed, and those who commit adultery with her into great tribulation, unless they repent of their deeds. And he who overcomes and keeps my works until the end, to him I will give power over the nations, and I will give him the morning star. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches.
This is the town of Thyatira, or at least what's left of it, bunkered down into the bustling city of Akhisar, Turkey. These are the remains and ruins of this town where the early church grew up. Originally, Thyatira was founded by Alexander the Great as a military garrison. His soldiers worshipped the god Apollo. He was their patron god. He was called the Son of God. By the time the early church grew up in this town in the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd centuries, it was a very prosperous town. Well, not like Pergamum or Ephesus or even Smyrna, those world-class cities. It was just kind of your average town. Maybe like the town you grew up in. But its major commodities were what drove the prosperity. Its lead commodity was textiles. In fact, the water here in Thyatira was so rich in minerals that no place else in the world could make a red textile so brilliant and so bold. It was desired worldwide. In fact, interesting, Lydia, who met Paul and accepted Christ in Philippi and entertained Paul, Lydia was a seller of purple from Thyatira. Its bronzesmiths were famous. Its silversmiths made some of the best silver pieces in the world. Its pottery was coveted. And in this town, believers were commended by Jesus Christ. He opens his letter by saying, I know your works, your love, your service, your faithful endurance. And then he adds, and that the works you do today are better than the works you did before. This was a church on an upward trajectory. And that's remarkable, given the pressures that early Christians faced in this town. So here's what early Christians were up against. The entire social, industrial, religious structure of Thyatira was built around the guilds. Now, a guild was like a labor union. Every single craft had its own guild. The textile people had a guild, the bronzesmiths, the silversmiths, they all belonged to their own guild. Now, it just wasn't like a labor union. It was more than that. That was the heart of their social function, their religious function, as well as their work. And Thyatira was a closed shop town. Periodically, the guilds would hold great festivals for all the members of their guild. The problem for Christians was that these festivals were held in the temple to Apollo, who was the patron of the guilds, as he was the patron to the military garrison that was here. Apollo, who was called the Son of God. So these grand guild festivities were held there. They would worship Apollo, they would eat and fellowship, and often involved themselves in sexual immorality. So what's a Christian to do? Well, if you said, "I'm not going," you risked the success of the guild, because maybe Apollo would be angry with your particular kind of craft or function. So needless to say, the guild only had one option, and that was to expel you. You lost your job. You know, in Pergamum, Christians faced the tremendous pressure of not worshiping in the temples and not worshiping the emperor, and perhaps for that would lose their lives. In Thyatira, they lost their jobs. It hit them where it hurts the most, right in the pocketbook. And every follower of Christ had to make a choice. It would be Jesus or his career. But in spite of the commendations that Jesus gives to these early followers, he says, "But I have something against you, that you tolerate the prophetess Jezebel in your midst." The context of the letter seems to indicate that this was a prophetess woman in the church who encouraged people not to quit their jobs, but to go to the festivities of Apollo and to participate in eating meat offered to idols and the immorality. No one is quite sure what her philosophy was or her theology was, maybe something like the Nicolaitans. But it is clear that she spun a kind of intellectual approach, which Jesus refers to as the deep things of Satan. So that maybe she would approach people and say, "Let me clue you in to think deeply about this, more carefully about this. And you don't need to be like these silly people who refuse to go to the temple." We're not sure what she said. We just know that she was a problem. We know that she was a problem because Jesus called her Jezebel, not a compliment. I mean, nobody in the early church is naming their little girls Jezebel, because in the Old Testament, she was the wife of Israel's most wicked king, Ahab. And she introduced the worship of Baal, the idolatry to Baal, to Israel. And Israelites were worshiping Baal to the extent of sacrificing their children to Baal and participating in the immoral sexuality of worship to Baal. And God so judged Ahab and Jezebel that it was the last straw before their captivity to the enemy forces. So compromising to save our skin, to make life a little easier, is a huge problem to Jesus Christ. And the warnings in the letter sound a very serious note against her teachings. I love how Jesus starts this letter. And if you were a marginalized believer in Thyatira, you'd love it too. Because he identifies himself as the Son of God. That's what Apollo called himself, the patron god of the guilds. And Jesus says, I am the Son of God. And then in reference to the bronze smiths, he says, my feet are like burnished bronze. And in reference to the refining fires of the industry here, my eyes are like flames of fire. What a marvelous, powerful picture of Jesus, who is so far above and over all the things that have plagued their lives. And in this letter, this Son of God, the choice is clear. Don't let Jezebel muddle it up. How much is Jesus worth to you? What kind of value do you place on him? Would you value your job, your career, your economy more than him? That's the choice. And so he says to the faithful who have not capitulated and compromised, he says to them, hold fast till I come. I love that. You know, this isn't the end game for them. The future is still ahead, and Jesus is coming back again for them. And then he makes them a promise. And the promise is this, that they will reign with authority over the nations. This weak, marginalized church that has no power, they will rule the nations. He says, I will give you a scepter of iron, and with my Father you will smash the vessels of the authorities of this earth that have so oppressed and persecuted you. And then he really seals the deal with this promise. And I will give you the bright and morning star. What is that? Well, in ancient times, all the way back to Babylonian times, Venus, the morning star, was seen as the source of ultimate authority. Maybe that's what he meant. But I like to think it's Jesus Christ himself. Because in Revelation chapter 21, Christ is called the bright and morning star. So he says, I will give you myself, that where I am, there you might be also, an eternal fellowship with the Son of God, Jesus Christ. What a promise. I would say that's something to persevere for. You know, in retail today, they have what is called a loss leader. That means you sell something and lose something up front on some particular piece of merchandise to get people in your store so they'll buy some more. Seems to me like losing your job for Jesus is like a lost leader. You pay a price up front for a really big gain at the end. And that's what Jesus calls us to valuing him more than anything else, regardless of the price. And he says to us, for those who endure, great is your reward in heaven.
And to the angel of the church in Philadelphia write, these things says he who is holy, who is true, he who has the key of David, he who opens and no one shuts, and shuts and no one opens. I know your works. See, I have set before you an open door, and no one can shut it. For you have a little strength, have kept my word, and have not denied my name. Indeed, I will make those of the synagogue of Satan who say they are Jews and are not, but lie. Indeed, I will make them come and worship before your feet, and to know that I have loved you. Because you have kept my command to persevere, I also will keep you from the hour of trial which shall come upon the whole world, to test those who dwell on the earth. Behold, I am coming quickly. Hold fast what you have, that no one may take your crown. He who overcomes, I will make him a pillar in the temple of my God, and he shall go out no more. And I will write on him the name of my God and the name of the city of my God, the New Jerusalem, which comes down out of heaven from my God. And I will write on him my new name. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches.
Philadelphia. It was a prosperous city until the year 17 AD, when this region was struck by a cataclysmic earthquake. An earthquake that was so devastating that Rome actually exempted Philadelphia from tribute for 5 years. The Philadelphians were hoping for a little more help from Rome to get them rebuilt, which was never really forthcoming, so they felt somewhat neglected by the emperor. Now, that neglect turned into a sense of deep betrayal when Domitian decreed that all of the vineyards of this region should be torn out. You know, I couldn't help but notice driving here today that in this beautiful valley, the vineyards were lush and full. The vineyards were the backbone of their economy. They were so good here that they competed with the vineyards in Rome. And so Domitian said, you guys tear your vineyards out so that ours can be the front edge of commerce. In doing that, he broke the backbone of their economy. So they felt deeply betrayed. The early Christians here in Philadelphia felt betrayed as well, betrayed by the authorities. So you can imagine what it meant for these early Christians to get a letter from Jesus where he began by saying, I am the holy and true one. Holy, meaning that he was totally other and different, and in that otherness, he was perfect, that he could do no wrong, that he would never do them wrong. And true, in that he would be absolutely faithful to them, never neglect them, never betray them. That was a word that these Christians desperately needed to hear. The curvature of the slope behind me represents the ancient seats of the theater that were part of the landscape of Philadelphia that Christians would have sat on and walked through. These early Christians receiving the letter from Jesus Christ read the references to open doors and shut doors. So what did that mean? Well, most likely it meant the fact that they had been kicked out of the synagogue and the door had been slammed shut behind them. That meant trouble for them. Maybe we need a little background here to fully understand what was going on. Jews who were persecuted fled throughout Asia Minor and established themselves in these little towns and would build a synagogue where they would meet and worship. Early Christians who came to this area would meet in those synagogues because in the early days, Christianity was really a Jewish sect, welcomed into the synagogue. But in time, as they preached the resurrection of Jesus Christ, as they proclaimed that he was the true Messiah, and as their evangelistic fervor brought other people to Christianity, they were finally excluded, kicked out, not allowed to come in. That meant for them that they became alienated from family and friends because the synagogue was the center of the social life of these early Jews. Not only that, it meant that they suffered some shame in the town when people would say, you're supposed to be at the synagogue now, why aren't you there? You know, I can imagine these early Christians, as their family would go to the synagogue, and as they would try to walk in, that the elder in the synagogue would say, no, you can't come, and shut the door. Or if they would go back, knock on the door, a little peephole would open. Someone would look out, say no, and shut the peephole. So this sense of exclusion was deep. Not only separated them from family and brought some shame to them in the community, but most seriously, it meant that since they were off the rolls in a synagogue, that their lives were at risk. In the early times of the empire, Jews were exempt from having to say Caesar is Lord. They had a register in this synagogue, and the names that were on that register were exempt. Now, these Christians' names would be struck from the book. Maybe, in fact, a reference to that statement in Sardis where Jesus said, I will never strike your name from the book of life. What Jesus was saying is, you will always belong to me. Well, they would be struck from the registry. And if the Roman officials came, and if these Christians weren't proclaiming that Jesus Christ was Lord, Their lives were at stake. Today, right now, wherever you are, you need to know that there are tens of thousands of Christians around the world that are suffering this kind of exclusion and alienation because they refuse to deny Jesus Christ. Marty and I have friends whose families have had a funeral for them once they've accepted Jesus Christ. Just a few days ago, I was chatting with a man who told me that when one of his friends had accepted Christ and made it known to his family, that two of his brothers plotted to kill him. Christians for years, centuries, have been paying the price for Christ, the price of exclusion. And that's what these Philadelphians were experiencing when they were betrayed by the authorities of the synagogue. The remarkable thing is that these followers of Christ here in Philadelphia refused to bail. They chose to bear the shame and face the danger for Jesus Christ. So Jesus Christ writes this letter to encourage them. It's a really sweet letter. He says to them, I hold the key of David, which meant that he had authority over the house of Israel. And he said, I will open a door for you and it will never be shut. Then he said something very fascinating. He said, these who have excluded you, someday they will bow their knees before you and know that I love you. I'm not sure what that means, when that will happen. But since these were Jewish believers, I wonder if they thought back to their national hero, Joseph, the one with the coat of many colors, whose brothers terribly betrayed him and put him in the path of death. Years later, the brothers show up in Egypt and Joseph is a ruler, and they bow their knees before him, begging him for bread and sustenance. And I wonder if ringing in these Christians' head were the words of Joseph when he said, you meant it to me for evil, but God meant it for good. Maybe. I hope so. And then Christ said, hold fast, because I'm coming again. And so he's made these promises to these excluded Christians, and as though they weren't enough, he ramps it up and gives them 4 more. He says, I will make you a pillar in my Father's house. Pillars are something that are stable, steady. They are always there. Nobody moves them. And he says, you will never go out of my Father's house. And I will put the name of God on your chest. And in the end, I will bring you into the New Jerusalem, the greatest city of all. I just love this about Jesus Christ. When people are steady and faithful to him, he comes alongside as their cheerleader and encourages them and thanks them for their loyalty. And some of us, even today, no doubt, are feeling excluded because of our stand for Christ. Maybe from family, maybe from friends, maybe at the office. Somewhere, some people are suffering for Jesus Christ and excluded. Well, here's the message. Jesus Christ notices that. And what you lose here, he gives you back in spades eternally.
And I will give him the morning star. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. He who overcomes, I will make him a pillar in the temple of my God, and he shall go out no more. And I will write on him the name of my God, and the name of the city of my God, the New Jerusalem, which comes down out of heaven from my God. And I will write on him my new name. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches.